that these interventions initially cause higher rates of disciplinary incidents and drops in student-reported subjective well-being. Only later do we see some recovery or even improvement.
So not only does banning phones with these lockable pouches not enhance achievement right away, schools face short-term headaches like more suspensions and less student happiness.
Yep, which makes you wonder, if the benefits are delayed or maybe even uncertain, why should schools invest limited resources into these policies, especially when enforcement costs and disruptions are so real?
That's a good question. Considering that smartphone distractions are often blamed for declining attention in class and growing mental health concerns, this evidence certainly challenges the common assumption that removing phones will directly improve these outcomes.
It really does. And since decisions around phone policies impact education budgets, teacher workload, and student experiences, this study has meaningful implications. By the end of our chat, listeners will grasp the nuanced evidence from the largest nationwide quasi-experimental study of these lockable phone pouch adoptions, understand the complex dynamic impacts on students, and reflect on what this might mean going forward for schools.
Absolutely. So let's start with what exactly this lockable pouch intervention is, since it's at the center of all this.
Right. The study zoomed in on Yonder lockable phone pouches. These are fabric cases equipped with magnetic locking mechanisms that students have to seal their phones into as they arrive at school. Once locked inside, the pouch stays sealed all day, preventing any phone access during school hours until dismissal or emergencies.
That's quite the physical barrier, isn't it? It's not just a policy saying no phones in class, but literally making phones unreachable. It's like digital handcuffs for the day.
Yeah, that's a fitting analogy. Unlike policies that rely on teacher discretion or no-show rules, where phones can be carried but must be kept hidden, these pouches enforce a hard limit. This reduces the enforcement burden on teachers, because the temptation and opportunity for sneaky phone use drops drastically.
Makes sense. And given that by 2026, nearly 5,000 schools across the U.S. had adopted these pouches, the researchers had a vast sample to analyze. Plus, they leveraged detailed administrative data directly from Yonder about adoption timings, which is pretty rare for policy research.
Exactly. But the richness doesn't stop there. The study combines multiple data sources. First, GPS phone location pings tracking device activity on school campuses during the day, covering over 40,000 schools. Then, a nationwide teacher survey with more than 100,000 respondents reporting on phone policies, enforcement, and student phone use.
Right, and they combined this with state-level administrative records on standardized test scores, both middle and high school, attendance, and disciplinary actions across multiple states. Plus, they included student self-report data on subjective well-being, classroom attention, and online bullying from panorama education surveys.
That integrated multidimensional data approach really strengthens their ability to triangulate actual phone use and its effects on multiple student outcomes.
For sure. And the estimation strategy was particularly sophisticated. They used a staggered difference in differences design with the Callaway and Santa Ana doubly robust estimator, which handles the staggered adoption across schools and heterogeneous effects better than traditional DID.
And they conditioned on rich baseline school covariates like size, urbanicity, demographics, and poverty measures to address non-random adoption, since Yonder adopters tended to be bigger, more urban, and serving more diverse and lower-income populations.
So the design tries hard to capture the causal effect of the lockable pouch adoption, not just correlations from observational differences.
Yeah. Okay, so with that as context, what did they find about phone use itself? Did the pouches actually reduce in-school phone use as designed?
They did, quite substantially. Starting with the GPS data, net phone visits per student during school hours within the building polygons fell by roughly 0.19 log points right after adoption, translating to about a 17 to 21% decline. And that decline grew to nearly 0.3 log points, or about 30% lower phone activity, 2 years after adoption.
And just as compelling was the teacher-reported data. Teachers said the share of students using phones during class for personal reasons dropped from 61% before adoption to about 13% after. That's an enormous, roughly 80% relative drop.
Those vocal complaints and anecdotal stories about kids sneaking phones didn't seem to reflect the big picture here. The physical pouch system really tightens access.
Though it's worth noting GPS data have limitations, they also capture phones belonging to staff, parents, or visitors, and the pings don't directly map to screen time, but reflect app-driven location signals. So, the decline in GPS signals is a conservative lower bound of reduced phone use by students.
Right, and the teacher reports provide a complementary but subjective angle. Altogether, though, the evidence points strongly to meaningful reductions in school phone activity.
Now switching gears, what about the unintended consequences or short-run disruptions? I found these particularly fascinating.
Yeah, immediately after implementing the pouch policy, disciplinary incidents spiked. Quantitatively, incidents rose roughly 0.085 standard deviations on a school-level disciplinary index, which translates to about a 16% increase in suspension rates relative to baseline.
So, we see a clear enforcement effect. Introducing a new rule brings a wave of rule-breaking and monitoring that results in more suspensions, at least initially.
But the increase isn't permanent. Over the next couple of years, disciplinary rates trend back toward baseline and even dip below it, suggesting that initial disruption gives way to adaptation.
And subjective well-being instruments tell a similar story. Student-reported well-being drops sharply by about 0.6 school-level SDs or 0.2 student-level SDs in the year of adoption, but then rebounds, becoming significantly positive by the second post-adoption year.
I think this aligns with what behavioral research shows about adjustment costs. Big changes like banning phones physically can cause frustration, reduced feelings of autonomy, or peer social dynamic shifts that strain students initially. But over time, as students and schools settle into new routines, emotional outcomes improve.
The implications here for policymakers are important. Phone bans aren't a clean switch, but a social transition requiring time.
In classroom attention, the results are more nuanced. Overall, there's little consistent change, though some later year estimates signal possible declines in attention or focus, especially in high schools. But these are confounded by pre-existing trends, so cautious interpretation is warranted.
Same goes for perceived online bullying. No measurable changes emerged, which makes sense since online harassment can happen off campus or outside school hours, unrelated to phone access during the day.
Coming to academic achievement, this is where the headline result is pretty striking.
Yeah, on average, restricting phones with yonder pouches doesn't move the needle on standardized test scores. The combined math and English language arts index shifted by basically 0, minus 0.004 school-level SDs, which converts to a negligible minus 0.002 student-level SDs.
And with the statistical precision they have, they can rule out effects larger than about 0.008 student SDs. To frame that, most educational interventions or teacher effects are an order of magnitude larger. For example, a 1 SD increase in teacher value added boosts test scores by roughly 0.1 to 0.14 math SDs.
However, they did find interesting heterogeneity by grade level. High schools saw modest positive effects on math, a 0.048 school-level SD increase, which translates to about a 0.024 student-level SD gain, or a near 1 percentile bump in math scores. That's small but meaningful.
While middle schools experienced a slight negative effect in math around minus 0.027 school SDs, with no meaningful change in English.
This pattern might reflect differences in phone use intensity. High schoolers use phones more frequently, so the reduction yields bigger gains.
And middle schoolers might substitute restricted phone use with more in-person distractions or other behavioral issues, reducing net academic benefits.
Also possible are institutional differences, enforcement strategies, maturity of students, and whether phones play an instructional role.
It's a complex social dynamic, with phones acting as both distraction and social tools.
On attendance and peer relations, the findings are pretty clear-cut. School-level attendance rates didn't change significantly. Chronic absenteeism and attendance rates, net of disciplinary suspensions, were stable, and perceived online bullying was unchanged.
So, while phone pouches cracked down on in-school phone use, they didn't shift physical presence or perceptions of harassment.
The adoption process itself tended to reflect sharp tightening of phone policies. Most schools that adopted Yondr previously had lenient no-show rules allowing phones but out of sight.
And very few control schools implemented similarly strict policies during the study period, which enhances confidence that the findings reflect Yondr's impact and not some general policy trend.
Robustness checks were thorough. Results were consistent across different control groups, data confidence levels, and estimation methods. No evidence suggested compositional changes in enrollment or demographics drove the results.
Also, subgroup analyses showed that the positive high school effects were fairly broad, slightly larger for higher poverty schools, whereas middle school negative or null effects were similar across groups.
Mechanisms-wise, the rise in disciplinary incidents likely reflects enforcement-related violations and behavioral substitution, students replacing phone distractions with other disruptions.
The subjective well-being rebound over time indicates adaptation, where initial frustration fades and reduced online pressures or increased face-to-face socialization improve emotional health.
The null attendance and bullying effects suggest phones aren't primary drivers of those outcomes, or that school time restrictions alone can't fully address them.
Comparisons to earlier international studies show mixed results, but this U.S.-wide research offers an unprecedented scale and rich data, focusing on a well-defined, physically binding intervention.
The modest academic effects and initial adjustment costs emphasize that phone bans are not quick fixes or silver bullets for distraction-related declines in learning or mental health.
Finally, limitations remain. Observational window is limited to 3 years post-adoption. Other forms of phone policies may differ in effect, and many student experiences, creativity, socio-emotional skills, digital literacy, were not captured.
Plus, enforcement fidelity varies, which could moderate impacts.
So the overall takeaway, lockable phone pouches drastically reduce phone use in schools, yet translate into minimal short-term academic gains and involve initial disruptions that fade over time.
Right. This calls for more nuanced policy design and research that looks at longer-term trajectories and complementary strategies beyond banning phones alone.
Absolutely. And it invites educators and policymakers to balance the trade-offs between restricting digital distractions and preserving student autonomy and well-being during these critical developmental years.
What an illuminating study. It really advances our understanding of how technology and regulation intersect in education.
Indeed. Thanks for unpacking this with me.
Likewise.